All right, well, welcome everybody to Web Scraping Techniques with Pearl. I had a couple of questions I wanted to ask. Obviously we've all done some web scraping manually. Anytime you go to an HTML page and cut and paste it. But how many people here have done web scraping through scripting? All right. Okay. Using Pearl? Good. Well, feel free to speak up if you have any modules that you use or any interesting things that you want to add to this talk. So I'm interested, for one thing. I've been doing web scraping for probably about 6 years, maybe longer, maybe about 8 years, using various different techniques. So I'm going to describe what I know about. So let's get going here. Here's the topics I'm going to talk about. We'll briefly describe what it is. I thought we might want to talk about some legal issues because there are legal issues. And they're about as clear as mud. But hopefully we can at least get a feel for what you're up against and what you can and can't do.
Probably mostly on reuse, right?
Well, it was kind of surprising what I found, but it'll be interesting. I'd like to get some feedback too if you guys have any opinions on it. I personally, I'm a technician, so I'm for hire, so I don't want to get in trouble with the law, obviously, but I don't usually moralize it, but I think we should cover it. I've got some basic code examples, and now these are really simple examples that if you haven't done it before, it just covers what you need to know about some simple techniques with Perl code. And if Doug gives me a place to share that code with, we'll put it out there with this talk. But mainly what I wanted to talk about was more sophisticated ideas that use web scraping. And this section here, I'm going to talk about some investment tools that I use for my own personal use that use web scraping. And I think you get a feel for how powerful this technology really can be. It's really only limited by your imagination, because web scraping by itself is a fairly simple technology. It's not that hard. It's not that unique. But when you develop it as a part of a bigger strategy is where it really gets interesting, I think. And then lastly, I want to talk about how to protect your database information and files, etc., from automated scripts. I mean, you may be on the other side of the fence. You may work for a client, or you may work for a company that wants to share some of their data, but not all of it. And we'll talk about some techniques that you can use to limit people's access to your data. Okay, what is it? Web scraping with Perl is a computer software technique for automatically extracting information from websites. It's pretty simple. I mean, basically, you give a URL, you get back HTML, and you extract data from the HTML. There's usually two ways you can do it with Perl. You can either directly control a browser, or you can use some Perl modules to act as a web agent. The second way is most common and most preferred, but there are uses occasionally to control browsers with Perl. Has anybody ever done that, web scraping, controlling a browser? Okay. I don't recommend it. I've done it on the Windows side, and it actually used some of the technology that you talked about in your the OLE or Win32 OLE.
GUI automation.
Right. That's one way to do it. I'm sure there's other ways on the Linux side to do it as well. Selenium is a tool. If any of you use that would use a browser, control a browser essentially. That's kind of a neat tool. I'm not going to talk about it in this talk other than briefly here, but basically people use it to regression test websites. But it has a record function add-on to Firefox, and you can record your actions through the browser, and it'll actually write a Perl script for you.
Huh.
So it's kind of neat technology.
The department at my company uses that.
Yeah, I was highly impressed. I played around with it enough to write a couple simple scripts, and I could even see using their scripts and then converting them to, LWP or some other thing, just because they do a lot of the work for you.
Wow.
Especially if you're doing a lot of navigation and that kind of thing through a website, filling out forms, et cetera, et cetera. Again, my last point here about web scraping is it really gets interesting when it's a part of a larger strategy or process. So we're going to touch on that. Okay, web scraping risk. Well, I got to mention these because there's some downside here. Obviously, you don't have an API. So you're depending on a website to be there, for one thing. You know how bookmarks are. You go there a year later and they're no longer there. So a lot of these scripts that you write are sometimes a throwaway script. Sometimes they have a definite lifetime. That website may have gone away. They may have changed their HTML format, their navigation, that type of thing. You're going to find that these web scraping scripts require above average maintenance and can become obsolete. So, don't invest more time in them than you really have to because they have a limited life. And then lastly, one of the risks is there are legal considerations. If you don't fully understand them, you could possibly get into trouble. I've never gotten in trouble, but it doesn't mean I won't. Here's some related technologies and terms. I debated about what to call this talk. Does web scraping, is that meaningful to all of you, or is there a better term? Or okay. That's kind of what I found out there is most people call it web scraping, some people call it web indexing, and some people just get it confused with some of these other terms. Obviously, web crawlers, which is sometimes called spiders and bots, is a related technology that uses web scraping. So it's really a larger strategy that utilizes web scraping, and I think that's one of the more related terms. Some of these other terms here really don't relate that well. Data mining, I thought, could relate to it, but it really doesn't. Data mining is about applying mathematics and statistics to extract patterns and intelligence from large amounts of data. So it may have nothing at all to do with web scraping, or it could be paired with web scraping, if that was a part of your strategy. Data scraping is actually capturing unstructured or undocumented data between programs. So there's a lot of similarities there, but it has nothing to do with the web. Actually, you saw data scraping a lot more like 10 to 15 years ago. Remember when we all had these heavyweight applications on our desktop? And they had their own proprietary databases, and sometimes you didn't want to go through their GUI because they limited what you could do. You just wanted their data out of the database. Maybe they encrypted it.
Early 90s.
Right. I've actually done some of that data scraping. You just don't really need to do it much anymore. Screen scraping is even further back. That's a legacy.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
On data scraping, you can say using strace is probably a form of data scraping.
Okay, yeah.
You're capturing data in the middle of something that wasn't intended for.
Right, exactly. So usually your script is just automating their GUI and grabbing all the data out of it. Screen scraping is legacy from the dumb text terminals. Probably none of you people remember those terminals, do you?
I had an old fax terminal.
You do? Okay. Well, they actually a lot of times went through the terminal's memory, or maybe a driver or some such thing like that. And then lastly, we've got report mining. We've probably all done a little bit of report mining, You've got some Excel files or who knows what kind of files you've got, and you've got to extract data out of those. So those are similar technologies, but they're really not web scraping. Okay. Legal issues. Does anybody have any strong feelings on this? I don't personally, but I'd be interested if anybody did.
Yeah, I'm interested to see kind of like what you have to say about it, but I don't really have feelings one way or the other about it.
Okay.
No,
I just wanted to find out if I'm going to get tomatoes thrown at me or anything like that.
Nothing like that.
But from my little bit of research, which is, I probably didn't get past Wikipedia, so that's about as far as I got. But as far as I can tell, there's no U.S. laws prohibiting web scraping specifically. However, web scraping is usually part of a much larger strategy, and that's where you get into trouble usually. Obviously, you can web scrape copyrighted material. That would be a no-no. Trademarks, and if there's a user agreement on the site that you've filled out or whatever, that could get you into trouble. Most people are not after full copyrighted data. They're usually after pieces of information or data, and that is not copyrightable. And I just learned that through this research. Here's an interesting case. It occurred in 1991. It's Feist versus Rural Telephone Service, and you can kind of guess what this is about. Rural Telephone, you can't probably read this, but I can tell you a little bit about it. Basically, Rural Telephone Service Company, a little company that publishes all of their phone numbers and names and addresses. And Feist is a company that publishes larger area. They tried to get an agreement with Rural, and Rural wouldn't give it to them. So they just web scraped or stole their information and put it in their yellow pages or phone book. So Rural took them to court, and the local courts decided in Rural Telephone's favor. But then it went to the Supreme Court, and here's what Justice O'Connor has to say. Basically, that in copyright law, information is not copyrightable, but collections of information can be. Rural's claim, she says, basically had nothing unique or creative in it. So basically, if you have a collection of data and you add something original or unique, that's where you can copyright it.
Oh, because it's just a bunch of phone numbers.
Yes. Public knowledge, if you just gather a bunch of public knowledge and somebody web scrapes it from you, that's not a problem. I mean...
Because you can't copyright that.
So Feist won.
Right. Yeah. So Feist won at the Supreme Court level.
I didn't know about that.
So that's kind of interesting. So that's in favor. But now I'm going to show you where some court cases got in trouble. Here we've got American Airlines and Southwest Airlines suing Fairchase. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine what that's about, right? Fairchase wants to give you the best, price on your airfares, and the airlines would rather you not find those prices. And however, I think in this case, Feist was doing a little bit more than just web scraping. They were, they're also competing against these airlines, so they're affecting the airlines' businesses. So if you're competing and affecting and causing them losses, you're going to probably have somebody sue you. So you got to think about that in your strategies with web scraping. Are you doing harm to the site in any way that you're web scraping? That could get you into some gray areas. It doesn't mean you could be sued. It doesn't mean you're going to lose the case. This eBay versus Bidder's Edge was a little bit more cut and dry, I thought, because Bidder's Edge was not only competing against eBay or giving these people, angles on eBay, but it was doing some things that it was basically bidding on things in an automated fashion in order to get some information from eBay so that it could, do its strategy. So that, I think, was getting a little bit, taking it a little bit further than some of these other cases. These three cases are still pending. I think they may have been decided at the local level, but they're pending for the Supreme Court decisions. And my guess is a lot of this will start shaking out in the next few years. We'll probably get, some of this will get cleared up. Since all of this really doesn't resolve anything for you, I put a link to a lawyer that actually does web scraping and data mining counseling, and he's located here in Phoenix.
Huh.
And he also gives a little blurb here describes what web scraping is. He says web scraping in and of itself is not per se legal or illegal. And then, he goes on. But, again, he doesn't give you anything, that useful to help guide you.
He doesn't want you scraping
For
the
free.
information.
Yeah, for free. So I guess if you're really going to do this for a business, you might want to consult a lawyer if you have any qualms about it.
Did you did you think about terms of service for websites? I mean, it may not be illegal per se, but maybe it violates the company's terms
Yes.
of service, like Google, and they
Those,
ban you.
in my reading on these cases, it sounded like they were being considered by the judges, but they didn't hold a whole lot of weight. Similar to the people that say this is copyrighted material, and guess what? The court says no, it's not really copyrighted. So in other words, you still have to make your case. But I think it does make it a little bit way more against web scraping if you sign some sort of
The
agreement.
scraping itself can't really be illegal. It's what you do with it. I mean, if it's on the
I think so. That's not a bad rule of thumb.
I would see, in my experience, it's more like the way that stores can refuse to serve you, websites can refuse to give you data.
Yes.
If they detect that you're scraping, they can shut you off.
Yes.
And they can just say, oh, never mind.
right.
And you can scrape, and they can shut you off.
Yeah, they could call you a bot and check
So
it out.
yeah.
And there are ways around that, but all they can do is make it harder and harder and harder.
Right, yeah. You can play that
In fact, we're going to talk about some of those. So save some of your ideas for later, because that's kind of interesting technology right there, that how they can detect who's doing what and how you can avoid that detection, etc. So anyways, this is fascinating stuff, but I'm not qualified to give you advice on this stuff. So all I could do is kind of give you a little bit of a feel for what's going on there. None of this stuff that I looked into made me that worried about what I do for web scraping, but when I show you some of the things I do, you go ahead and hit me. If you think that I might have a problem, let me know. I'd be curious and interested. Okay. All right, here's some basic code examples. We should be able to blow through this pretty quick because there's not much to them. Here's the simplest web scraping code I could think of.
You do
Control plus a few times.
All right.
There you go.
How's that?
That'll work.
Yeah.
Okay. Up here you're going to see LW simple module. That's usually what I use just because it's simple and it works. And it's fairly fast, I've found. Not that speed is always a consideration, but if you're going after a site, and I've actually worked on scripts that can take days, weeks, and even months, believe it or not. It wasn't for myself, but for clients. And in those cases, speed does really matter. Here we simply give LW simple get a URL. It brings back a page, which is just going to contain HTML. Here we're just going to use a regex to get what we want and print it out. And as a matter of fact, let's run this thing. And I apologize, I meant to set this up beforehand. Let's see, we got an LWP. And there it is. I suppose I should show you the website that this comes off of. In fact, I think I can just, oops. I don't want this guy. Here's a website we just scraped. It's got lots of good stuff on it, but all we cared about was this little thing right here. So, now, regex is just one way to do it, But if you use regex, I recommend you use your tags and get everything between tags to avoid fragile code. If you put real large, HTML in your regexes, they tend to break often just because. Yeah. And then of course, if you get too much data here, you can just, you can put your if-else statements in between to get what you're really after. So that's a simple one. Now I'm going to show you something that's a little bit more properly put together, but it actually does exactly the same thing. I can't run this live because I got a couple modules that aren't on this laptop and I didn't realize it before I came.
Control plus again.
Oh yeah. Okay, this does exactly the same thing, but we're doing a little bit more. For one thing, we're worried about encoding now. You realize that, HTML sometimes has its own little encoding characters in there, and when you do a manual cut and paste, they end up in your editor, and you start swearing and all that kind of stuff. Well, if you use the encode module, you can automatically translate to your normal text, and you don't have to worry about it. So that would be a more proper way of web scraping. This one is using LWP user agent instead of LWP simple. It's also using tree builder to have a better interface.
XPath.
Right, your XPath. It gets you out of the regex code. So here you're doing the same thing. You're creating a user agent object. You're doing a get with a URL. You're checking for errors this time. We got a little error checking in there. Here's your decode. The result of your decode will be your page. It'll be HTML until you run it through your tree builder. Now you're going to end up with a real tree, which you can navigate through. Here we're doing our navigation, and this is your HTML tag right there that you're passing in. The output is a node. You can put your node as text, and you'll get exactly what we saw here. There won't be any difference. It just be done more properly.
That's nice. Very cool. Let's see.
Okay, so that's a second example. Here's a more modern type code that you might see some of the younger guys doing. It uses a newer module, Web Scraper. Has anybody used that one? Oh yeah. I've never used Web Scraper before this little demo, but it basically, the reason I don't use new modules is because they tend to not last and be around for, it seems like the next time I download it with the latest version of Perl, for some reason it's not compatible or some goofy thing. But it is kind of nice because it actually, it has its own little interface here. You pass it your tag, you create a scraper object, you pass it your URI, which is just a well-formatted URL, and you do a print on the object, and that's it. It automatically does your encoding. It, you don't need tree builder or whatever that thing was. It does it internally, so it's just a little cleaner interface. So that's 3 different ways of doing essentially the same thing. Now I wanted to show you a little script that demonstrates. This is one I wrote. Basically, you don't have to always. Oh yeah. I wonder if I'm ever going to get that without you actually giving me a hint here.
You must have good eyes, or you're sitting really close.
Yeah. Is that big enough, or want me to go bigger? Okay.
Yeah.
Basically, sometimes the data you're going after could be a file or a series of files. And so what I did was I found a site here that's serving up free gifts. These happen to be flowers. So they're kind of neat. I actually sent a couple of these out on Mother's Day email, and it was kind of fun. But I thought I'd use this as a nice demo because, as you could see, they made it real convenient for us. In this URL, if I go to 2.gif, I get a different one.
Nice.
So all they did was, being lazy developers like we probably are, they just incremented their GIF numbers
Right.
and kept the name the same. So that made it a real easy script to write and demonstrate. So here we're back to using LW Simple. Here's my example URL. Here's a partial URL that we're going to build up to a full URL down here. As you notice, in most of these real scripts, web scraping scripts, you're going to have at least one while loop, sometimes more than one, but basically in this case, we're after 12 files. I made the image limit 12. If you change this number to 100, you'll get 100 files, essentially. In our while loop, we're checking our errors. We're checking our file limit. And LW Simple has a nice get store. So basically you feed it a full URL and a target file name, and it handles everything for you. If you had a path that you wanted to enter in there, you'd make that a part of the target file name, and it would put it in your path. So that's kind of convenient. And I thought we can actually demonstrate this one if you want. Let's see. Okay, here's where they're going to end up at. And let's get back to our DAW screen. And what's this called? It's called Flowers. So what I expect is some files that end up over there while this is running. I also have a print statement that'll print out things as it goes. Oops, I'm in the wrong directory. Taking longer on your server than it does on mine, but there they are.
Cool. Maybe they're getting high load right now.
On mine, it would take a couple seconds each. It looks like it's taking more than that here for some reason.
Yeah, we got a wonderful connection here.
Oh, okay. So you could send this type of data out you could put it out to a log file if you wanted, that type of thing. I generally do that because if these things run for hours, something will go wrong, and at least you've got some information to go on. At any rate, that will collect 12 files eventually. And I don't want Explorer. Let's bring up something. Let's try this guy. So there they are.
Cool.
Oops.
It's just the actual animation.
Oh, that is? So I guess we don't want this app, huh? What else would be better?
You need Firefox would be good, but it's not unlimited, so.
You can
I
actually
guess you
choose
can drag
them.
it if you want.
Oh, how about,
You just do that.
Yeah, I want to live with that.
how do I get to the next one? All right.
Yeah. That's pretty cool though.
Yeah, that's why I don't use it.
At least the virus smells good.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened to this guy. It's still waiting though. So we're going to kill it. But it works at my house.
Yeah, we've actually been having some network issues today, so
All right.
we'll chalk it up to that.
You'll just have to believe me.
Yeah.
Presentation guys.
That too.
Okay, here's a interesting code example. It's really only useful if you've got a Schwab account, but somebody wrote a Schwab module.
Nice.
And I actually have the code here, which I'll keep with this as well, and he's just doing web scraping in his module. But what's nice is Of course, this is a HTTPS site, so it's a secure site. You have to log in with a username and password. So let's take a look at his module. It uses www Mechanize. Oh yeah, I forgot, didn't I? In the last one. That other one didn't have anything interesting, so. Okay, so now you can see we've got www Mechanize, which is, I haven't used it a lot. Has anybody used that one? You have?
I've used it quite a bit.
It does forms pretty well, I guess.
Yeah.
So if you're filling out forms and navigating and doing something sophisticated, this is pretty good.
Basically, it gives you like a browser object is what it models like.
Okay.
As if it were a browser. Because it's got like a back method and forward method and, stuff you would expect in a browser.
Well, this actually worked because I tested it at home and I happen to have a couple of Schwab accounts. I can't demo it here, but because I don't have his module installed. But you could see what he's doing in here. I mean, all the code is there. Here's your user agent object. He's getting a URL or croaking. He's logging in here. He's getting his content after he logs in here. And then you'll see somewhere in here he's starting to extract his data. And it looks like he's creating some sort of user account object. And then he prints out your balance at the end of it.
Very cool.
So if you want to play around with that code, you're free to do it. Or if you just want to have it as a nice example of www Mechanize, that's there as well.
Very cool. Thanks.
All right.
So there's that.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some of the things that I do. They involve some stock tools. I call them tools because I haven't really integrated them into a real application. They're kind of separate tools that I use almost every day to trade stocks. And my stock strategy isn't really interesting to you, so I won't go into it that much. But I think you'll find out that I've found some really useful ways to put web data to use in ways that save me a lot of time. Because my idea of trading stocks is not sitting in front of a tube for 8 hours a day like some stock traders. I want to be able to trade stocks. My ultimate goal is to be able to do all my trading in like 10 minutes a day, if I can. And I can't say that I could quite get it down that far, but if I had to, I probably could. But I need tools to do that implement my strategy in the quickest way that I can think of. So that's essentially what it is. And all this is really is to show you one way to implement a larger strategy using a collection of web scraping tools. All right? So the first requirement I got is build a daily view of world stock indexes by continent and by the whole world. I use this for when I roll out of bed and I gotta, the market opens up at 6:30. I've got enough time to grab a cup of coffee and I just want to see what happened in the world without reading a whole bunch of articles, right? I just want an index. I want one index that tells me what went on last night, because you remember the Asian markets are open all night long, and you'll see that the markets are really all interconnected nowadays. So here's a URL that I use to scrape. And it's got some nice information. It's got world indexes by continent. Here's Asia. Here's, I don't know, can you see this? Let me see. Is that good?
Yep.
Here's Asia. Here's a bunch of indexes which I don't really care about because it's too much information for me at 6:30 in the morning. But I can total all this stuff with a little bit of math and come up with a composite index by continent and by the world. And that's more useful to me because that's all I care about. Just give me the temperature outside is all I'm looking for. So here is the composite view I end up with after I web scrape it. This comes out of a database. I have one entry per day, so this script I execute once a day. It puts the data into it does a calculation, it puts it into a database. I have one number for Asia, one for Europe, one for America, and one for the world. It's always going to be a plus or minus number. The number itself means nothing other than it's relative to the previous numbers. And you can also graph this, and which I've done, and looks like it's a little bit too big for the screen, but
Yeah, you can back off a little bit, maybe control minus.
oh, okay. There you go. This is kind of neat too. Pearl's got a graph module. I don't know if any of you ever got. It's real easy to use, but basically, if you got array numbers, it's real easy to make a graph out of it. Now, this graph always wants to come back to 0. If you notice, it's not going to climb forever or go down forever. It's going to vary plus or minus from 0. But that's very useful. It's a contrarian indicator for me. When I see something like this, if I wake up in the morning and that's the last dot on my graph, that means the world has gone through hell and they just went down a lot.
Yeah.
But that's actually a positive indicator for me. That means I should be buying with both hands, right? Because what happens after it does that? It goes way up. And it always does. It's just the nature of the stock markets. So here's what we had a few days ago. We had a pullback, and it took about 3 days to recover, and now we're starting another decline, although they're very minor. But you could see how I can look at this stuff and in less than 20 seconds get useful information about what's going on in the world without looking at anything else.
Sort of get an idea of the kind of decisions you plan on making that day.
Right. So I've just invested probably 20 seconds, because I actually do run the script manually, although I'll probably put it on your server and just have it automatically done for me.
Contact that.
That'll save me another 10 seconds.
There you go.
So
Top question, is that an image or is that HTML?
that is a PNG image. And if you're curious, I might even have the code around here. Let me see what I got here. I'm hiding some code in here somewhere. I don't remember what this is. Oh, this is actually what's web scraping it. And there's nothing really interesting here that's any different than the other examples. You got a big while loop. You got some ugly parsing going on, and you end up with an insert statement to my table right down here. And that's basically it. It looks like 126 lines of code. So you can see it doesn't take a lot of code to execute something like that, a strategy like that. I was hoping, though, I had that little graph thing for you, but I don't.
You can always post some.
Yeah, that's true.
later.
Yeah. Which one is?
Yeah, just a small example.
Have you ever heard of high charts?
No.
I've been using high charts a lot lately for a project I'm doing at work. It uses JavaScript and jQuery to render charts.
Oh, yeah?
Pretty slick, yeah.
Cool.
You can just Google high charts. HIG.
And does it output images, or does it?
It outputs like a Flash interface.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, here it is. Actually, I just found it, and basically, I'll get down to the good stuff.
Yeah, DD graph.
Oh, okay.
'Cause there are actually several different.
Now I'm using lines, but they have bars, they have pie graphs, etc., etc. It's really easy to use. The hardest part, actually, this is just to set up some tick labels, believe it or not. It took more code to do that than the rest of it. Here's my selects out of the database into arrays, and then you end up with this array here that you're going to pass to their object. And these are just, graph doodad things. You got to, you could pick some colors for lines and things like that. And then at the very end, you end up plotting it, and you end up outputting it as a file. Here's my wi.ping that I actually put into my www that ends up on the web page. And that's it. It's like 87 lines of code.
Very cool. Looks like.
And most of that is reusable. I mean, for other things that once you set it up the way you want it. So if people are interested, I'll post that as well.
That's pretty cool.
Okay. Oops. Did I go backwards?
Yes, you did.
Okay, new requirement. Build a stock table to support stock analysis. Well, I found a really nice site for this. I'm going to show it to you. Here it is. VOD Data. They make it real convenient because look they've got a drop down. You select your exchange. And what are we? We're at NASDAQ right now. Let's go to the New York Stock Exchange and press a letter. And there's all the B symbols for the New York Stock Exchange with the names of the companies.
Wow.
So this is a perfect web scraping site, right?
Yep.
Patterns.
Right. Now, the rest of this data I didn't find as useful. I mean, this is, you'd have to hit it every day. I'm going to get that data from other sites. But to start my database, that was a perfect place to go. The script that scrapes that takes about 2 hours to complete. I end up with about 8,000 records in my database. And I only have to rerun it every 2 or 3 months because, how often do new companies show up on these exchanges?
So you just check for duplicates every time you...
Yeah, no, it'll check. The script checks for it if it's already there. Yeah. It goes and gets the data. It checks to see if it's already in there. It'll refresh the data, or it'll insert it if it's not in there. So that's basically it. I think I've got a script in here that shows you that. Yeah. So here again, very similar script to the previous ones, except that you've got 2 loops. The first loop is for your markets. I'm only getting NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, and Amex. That's all I care about. And then the second for loop is iterating through your alphabet. And from those 2...
Shorten that line by quite a bit.
What's that?
That alphabet line.
Oh, you could?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll tell you later.
All right.
Oh, just make it.
Just A, then that's
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Forgot about that.
So that's it. And then it has some ugly parsing stuff. About 100 lines of code.
Cool.
So now we've got a database, but of course it doesn't have much data in it. So we've got a new requirement, build... Oh, I went backwards again. We want to populate that stock table with useful information from other sites. And one of the best sites for this stuff I've found is NASDAQ itself. This site is heavy duty. I've never seen them slow. I've never seen them down. I mean, they don't seem to blink that I hit them fairly frequently, and they don't seem to care. I guess they like traders like me because they know I'm trading their stock and spending money. So
Right.
I think there's a symbiotic relationship there, which is why I don't think and all of this is public knowledge that I'm scraping out here. PE ratios, that's public knowledge. There's dozens of sites I could get this information from, but I like NASDAQ because they seem reliable and they don't change their format, and it seems to work. I've been using this site for probably 8 months now and without any changes to the script. So I have a script that goes through all of these. It takes a couple hours to complete. I run it every 2 or 3 months to refresh the data because most of that stuff doesn't change except quarterly when they do the reports.
I didn't notice, are you putting any delays in there when you're pulling this stuff?
I don't, but if you're concerned about that, you should.
Obviously do.
Yeah. On little mom and pop sites, I do.
Okay.
But I'll tell you what, NASDAQ, that's a heavy duty site. I think I'm probably a little gnat in their world, is my guess.
I'm thinking more in the terms that they're gonna flag you as I guess I'm used to scraping like
Well, I have this. I only do every 2 or 3 months. I try and run it off when not during trading hours. So a script like this doesn't have to run during trading hours. But so far, I have not found. They don't seem to complain about anything.
You should do stuff like change your user agent, things like that.
You could do that. You could
Things
go.
off, so you break patterns.
You could go through a proxy. You know, you could go through multiple proxies, that kind of thing. But so far, I haven't had to. But if I did, I would. And I also have a backup plan. If NASDAQ, for some reason, didn't like me doing it, I could go through my own broker at Schwab. And actually, the things that I need in real time, I could do even quicker than I do from NASDAQ. The only reason I don't like going through my brokerage account is because I don't like automating scripts with my user password. You know how that goes all the time.
Yep.
So I try to avoid it. Okay, now here's another site that I get data from, Forbes. And it turns out this data has actually saved me a bundle of money. What they do is they rate these companies on their accounting practices, from conservative to very aggressive. And this has turned out to be a lifesaver because last year the stocks I made the most money on were Chinese stocks. Well, we're finding this year that the Chinese stocks are cooking their books.
Nice.
And so it makes it a little harder to make money on Chinese stocks if they go out of business or get delisted because they cheated. Well, I found that I can build a database of auditors and find things out about these stocks. And I'm going to show you a report that was derived from web scrape data. But of course, this report comes right out of a database, the database I built from that data. So basically, this lists all of the auditors in my database of about 8,000 companies, and it gives you counts of how many companies they've audited, what percentage is in the conservative to very aggressive, and so now I have a way to tell the stocks that are using bogus auditors, and I can almost tell you it's mainly these companies that have only audited one company. They're probably a shell company. They change their name every so often, and they're just putting their seal of approval on their books, and that's what's happening. The auditors that you can more likely trust are the big ones like Ernst & Young. It's got over 1,000 symbols in my database, of which only 10% are in the very aggressive. That's a very good auditor. So I think I can depend more on them as a safe auditor than some of these other ones. And it actually,
For their audits then?
yeah, if I'm analyzing a new stock, I want to find out who audits them and how do they come out on this list. Can I trust them? And it actually saved me a bundle of money because Puda, which got delisted this past month, they're a Chinese coal company. I made more money on that stock last year than any other stock. Well, when I started doing this was right around when all this was breaking, and I saw some suspicious things in Puda's, auditing practices. So I sold out of them at like $10 and some change, and they got delisted at $6. But once they're delisted, that means you can't trade them. So will those people get $6 a share even? You don't know.
Yeah, probably not.
So, this could save you a lot of money, And all of this came from data that's out on the web, but of course you have to do something with that data because the sites aren't going to give you that.
Right. Huh.
So, how am I doing? I only got 2 slides left and we got 12 minutes, so that's not too bad. Okay, here's RealTime Prices. This is what I use mostly. Oh, okay. Here's where I'm getting the RealTime Prices. NASDAQ again. That's their screen.
Right, Intel's up.
But here's the application that uses those prices. Now this is actually live off of Doug's website. So this is what I use every day. If we were trading right now, I could press my refresh button and everything would change on there. The colors, the prices, all that stuff is real time. Another reason I use NASDAQ, because if you go to, say, Yahoo Financials and look up a stock, it's 20 minutes delayed. That's not useful to me when I'm trading. It's old information. So this is very good. I also have it hooked up to where if I get 3 buys it kicks off some music. Because I don't watch this screen all day long. I'm doing other things, more important things, hopefully. So if something, triggers, it plays music. And if it's a buy signal, it plays one type of music. If it's a sell signal, it plays another type of music. So it's kind of neat. And if I want to mute it, here's how I mute it. If I've heard the music already and I don't want to take action, I can mute them and refresh, and it won't play the music anymore. I have plans in the future to also have it send out text messages or email in the event, that I'm on a tennis court or something like that. Right. Not that I can trade for my phone, but...
Well, you could if you had a phone.
Yeah, I suppose I could. So basically, that's just a sample of the tools I use, the strategies I've used that incorporate web scraping. And I'm sure all of us could think of other ideas as well, either for your own personal use, for your clients, for your company. I've actually gotten paid for doing this type of work. Sometimes, if I don't have enough work and I'm working for a company, I'll go talk to their financial guys, and I'll find out they're putting some report together every month manually, and I'll tell them, you know what, I got nothing better to do. I'm going to write you a little script. It'll do most of your report, and all you got to do is a little bit extra after that, and they love you for it. It's a nice way to maybe not get a raise, but who knows, Yeah, it doesn't hurt, right?
Karma.
Okay. Last screen here is protecting information from automated scripts. Does anybody have a use for that? I mean, in other words, have you done a website that you want to share some of your information, but you don't want someone to empty your database?
I haven't yet.
No?
I wouldn't mind hearing about it, though.
Yeah.
Okay. The types of companies that do that sort of thing that come to my mind are, for instance, we had a court case on a telephone company. Well, telephone companies, a lot of them will put it online. Sometimes they'll have an application on a computer, but they have to share their information with their subscribers, but they really don't want the whole world to empty their database. So they devise all kinds of schemes to keep you from getting all of their names and phone numbers. I would think the same thing with company phone lists might have the same problem. So if you ever get involved in that stuff, some of the ways you can frustrate but not defeat this technology is, of course, user IDs and passwords is one way. You're going to scare a lot of people away from your website doing that, but that's an effective way. There's a technology called CAPTCHA, which we've all seen, but you might not be familiar with the name of it. But basically, it's swiggly text and noisy background color stuff, And that can be...
Less than 5 tries, you're a human.
Right. Actually, that is pretty effective. I don't know of a way around that.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if you knew a way around it. So.
No, I mean,
It depends on the capture. Basically, different ones. I've seen some of them that they'll say, oh, well, this one's been broken, and people have gotten around it. So it just depends on the technique that they use. Some of them have been, some of them haven't been.
Well,
it's just like everything else. It's an escalating war on both sides.
Have you heard some of those use, like reCAPTCHA, I think it is the one that helps do OCR for the Library of Congress? That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, that one's
that one I don't, it doesn't make me so angry to type in.
Yeah, because you at least feel like you're doing something useful when you do it.
Well, I've done enough production OCR that I know the weaknesses in the OCR, and some of those CAPTCHA stuff, I don't think OCR could get it. There's so much noise in the background when you have...
Well, that's what was my joke, though, is I've seen some of them so bad.
I can't read them either.
It takes me forever to get some of theirs.
Another thing that defeats OCR is put your letters all different sizes. Because think about it, OCR is going line by line usually, and it's only going to see part of your letter. So your P, it may think is an I or an L. Right. It also has difficulties distinguishing between L's and 1s. There's a lot of problems with OCR. Yeah. Different fonts. OCR has trouble with different fonts.
One of the ways around that is you have a script that's capturing these, and you just type in, all you have to do is type in the screenshot. Just do that manually, and the rest is on.
Right. they could have people, they could have rows of people just getting through the CAPTCHA.
Outsourced to India.
But
I
But-
know they do that a lot for the bulletin boards or the forums and stuff like that.
Right.
Have humans actually typing in the captions.
You can limit the amount of data shown on the screen. For instance, on a telephone directory, a lot of them will have a search engine. You type in part of the way, and it gives you, hundreds of people of Smith with the name Smith. Well, if you only give them 5 at a time, that slows things down. If you only allow them one search every 10 seconds, obviously that slows things down. If they've got millions of pieces of data, now you're talking weeks or months to get that data. So they can frustrate you that way. Low quality. Oh, I already mentioned. Did I mention OCR here? It doesn't look like it. OCR. I've seen sites that will actually show digital GIFs of numbers.
Yeah.
Now there's ways around it. OCR will probably solve that, but it gets rid of a lot of the bots. Are simply not gonna. They're just gonna go somewhere else. You might want to monitor and log IP addresses. That was mentioned earlier. They can detect whether you're hitting them quite frequently and then block you. Don't do if you're sharing files, don't increment, by count. It makes it really easy to go get all your files. I know it's a little more trouble to give unique names, but that's another thing that can frustrate people.
Yeah, actually, you just use a GUID and you have
Yeah.
problems.
There you go. So that's all I had. Does anybody have anything else to add any experiences or anything that, for instance, I'd be interested in Perl modules. If anybody's used a Perl module to do this technology that wasn't mentioned here.
I don't remember the name of it, but I'll post it on
Oh, okay.
It's one that I use a lot.
Because I'm always interested in.
Think of any that I've used that you didn't mention, and you mentioned a few I didn't use. I actually did one once. This was really interesting. At the last company I worked at, they had this proprietary system that, it sounds so simple. Clients upload a file, emails go out to people. That's all I knew about it. I'm sure it did a lot more than that. But the problem was, emails didn't always go out to people. And these were really important people, like the CEO of our company or the CEO of some other company. And so it was a really, really, really big deal when these emails didn't go out. And they had the client come in and or the vendor come in and look at the engine, and they couldn't figure it out. So I ended up actually automating a test that would run on an hourly basis that would go through, upload. I wasn't so much screen scraping. I used some screen scraping techniques as I was going through it, but then I would upload files. And then I would check my internal email address, and I would check a Gmail address, after a certain delay to make sure that you gave enough time for the email to get there. And then if one or either of them didn't have an email, it would send out an email to a whole list of people saying, possible failure, because that's all I could say. Maybe the email got delayed or whatever, but possible failure. So then real life people could go in and run a test and see if it worked and stuff like that. But yeah, I thought it was kind of a silly solution to, it's like I've written a script to make a, multi $10,000 system send email on a reliable basis. I just thought it was kind of funny.
It's funny. Wow.
Yeah, we
More like a babysitter
ran that
script.
script we ran it for like a year or so, and then I don't know what they did. I think they went back to like people doing it manually. Well, because that's how they were doing it before. Was somebody was literally at the help desk or in the ops group was running this test on an hourly basis. You had a person that was sitting there uploading files and seeing if they got emails.
Wow.
Ridiculous. Yeah. So anyway.
Wow.
All right. Well, I guess that concludes this presentation, and I'd like to thank everyone for coming. And if you have any ideas concerning this technology, I'd love to hear in the future about them.
Excellent job.
Thank you.